I knew something was wrong the second my tires crunched onto the gravel of my long, familiar driveway. After being gone for almost 8 months for a project assignment across the country, I expected my land to look exactly the same as the day I left it. Quiet, empty, open, untouched. But nothing could have prepared me for what waited just beyond the tree line. I stepped out of my truck and inhaled the familiar scent of pine and damp soil, hoping the familiarity would calm the sudden tightness in my chest. But then I noticed them. Deep tire tracks gouged into the dirt, fresh enough that the soil still held the shape of the treads. They were too wide, too sharp, too new to belong to anyone who had permission to be here. Curiosity pulled me forward, but each step made my gut twist a little harder. I pushed through the narrow stretch of woods separating my driveway from the main clearing, expecting to see the same open field I had bought years ago, with nothing but wild grass and sunlight stretching across the empty space. Instead, I stopped so abruptly that the breath punched out of me. Standing dead center in my clearing was a full-sized, modern, freshly constructed house. 2 stories tall, bright as day, and absolutely not mine. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I was hallucinating. I blinked hard, twice, then rubbed my eyes until the edges stung. But the house didn't disappear. It stood proudly, like it had every right to exist on my land, like someone had slipped in during my absence and stolen the very ground out from under me. My heart hammered in my chest, not from fear but from a disbelief so sharp it bordered on pain. This couldn't be happening. Not to me. Not on my property. As I walked closer, the smell of fresh paint lingered in the air, mixing with the sharp tang of cut lumber. Tools sat neatly stacked near the porch, some still covered in sawdust. A pair of muddy footprints led across the new concrete walkway, and just beyond the house, parked at an angle like the owner felt entirely at home, sat a large black pickup truck I had never seen before. I moved around the side of the house, still half convinced I'd bump into someone who would explain this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe they built on the wrong parcel. Maybe they had the wrong coordinates. Maybe anything. But before I could knock on the door or call out, a sharp voice sliced through the clearing behind me. "Excuse me, and just what do you think you're doing?" I turned to see a woman in a stiff blazer standing at the edge of the trees, arms folded and chin lifted with the kind of confidence only someone drunk on authority could manage. Her name was Karen Whitfield, though I didn't know that yet. Later, I'd learned she was the HOA president, a woman who ran the neighborhood like a private kingdom. But right now, all I saw was someone who looked at me like I was trespassing on my own land. She walked toward me slowly, examining me the way a landlord might inspect a tenant who's behind on rent. "This is an active construction site," she said sharply. "You can't just wander onto private property." Private property? The word stung, boiling inside my chest. "This is my land," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I own this clearing. I've owned it for years." She smirked in a way that made my blood pressure spike. "Are you sure about that? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're interfering with HOA-approved development." I felt my jaw clench. "What are you talking about? I didn't approve anything." Karen tilted her head with a condescending smile. "Then you may be facing legal consequences for interfering with HOA-approved construction." And just like that, I realized this situation was about to explode into something far bigger than a simple misunderstanding. Before I could even breathe, the front door of the newly built house flew open with a force that echoed across the clearing. A man stormed out, his boots slamming against the porch steps like he owned every inch of the ground beneath them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scruffy beard and the kind of permanent scowl worn by someone who believed the world owed him something. He stabbed a finger in my direction and barked, "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing on my property?" His property. The words hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth to correct him, but he didn't give me the chance. He marched straight toward me, the heat of anger radiating off him. "I said this is my land," he growled. "My house, my project. You don't belong here." For a moment, all I could do was stare at him. I had returned to find a stranger living on my land, and now he was yelling at me as if I was the intruder. My heart thudded in my chest, a mix of confusion and rising fury. I tried to keep my voice steady. "This is my property. I own this clearing. You built your house on my land." He snorted, folding his arms like he was humoring a child. "Nice try. You won't scam me. I already talked to the HOA. Karen confirmed everything. She told me you were out of state and approved construction months ago." "I never approved anything," I said firmly, but Rick Dalton, because that's when he introduced himself, though not politely, just waved me off. "Save it. I'm not falling for your crap. And just so you know, my lawyer is already preparing paperwork. You misled me, and you're going to pay for it." "Misled you?" I repeated, stunned. "We've never even met." "Yeah, well," he said with a mocking grin, "that's for a judge to figure out. Not you." Before I could respond, a woman's voice screeched from inside the house. "Rick, who is that idiot yelling out there?" His wife stepped into the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrowed with instant hostility. "Is that the guy who's been causing trouble? The one Karen warned us about?" She leaned forward, glared directly at me, and shouted, "Get off our property." The insult burned, but before I could speak, Karen Whitfield herself reappeared, marching across the clearing like she'd been waiting for her cue. "That's enough," she snapped, cutting the air with her voice. "You're trespassing. HOA bylaws clearly state that no resident may interfere with construction once it has been reviewed and approved." "That doesn't apply here," I said, trying to control my temper. "This is my private property, not HOA land." Karen raised an eyebrow, her expression dripping condescension. "Everything in this community falls under HOA jurisdiction. And according to our records, this area was cleared for residential development months ago." I took a deep breath, fighting the mix of disbelief and anger bubbling inside me. "Your records are wrong. I never signed anything. I never even spoke to you." "Enough," Rick snapped, stepping closer, his tone shifting from mocking to threatening. "From now on, lawyers handle this. You're done talking to us." They overtalked me no matter what I said. Every word out of my mouth was drowned by hostility, lies, and arrogance. My hands shook with frustration. I had never felt so trapped, so blindsided, so utterly dismissed on land that legally belonged to me. As the tension hung thick in the air, Karen pulled a small folder from under her arm and smirked. "Since you refused to comply, I'm issuing you an emergency violation notice." I stared at her, stunned. "For what?" "You'll find out soon enough," she said coldly. "Expect it within 24 hours. And in that moment, I realized this confrontation was only the beginning, and they were preparing for war. The next morning, 3 violation letters sat on my porch before sunrise. I hadn't even had time to process the insanity of the day before, but the HOA had clearly decided to escalate things at full speed. The envelopes were marked in bold red ink with the word urgent, as if I had committed some kind of crime overnight. I tore the first one open, expecting at least some attempt at logic, but it accused me of unauthorized presence on HOA-controlled property. The second claimed I had damaged approved construction materials, and the third warned of pending disciplinary action. All lies, all fabricated, all designed to push me into a corner. A heavy sense of dread washed over me. The letters weren't meant to warn me, they were meant to break me. It was psychological warfare, and the HOA wasn't even hiding it. Later that afternoon, as I walked toward my truck, I heard soft whispers drifting from across the street. 2 neighbors I barely knew were leaned together, glancing my way, shaking their heads with pity, or maybe judgment. I didn't understand until one of them let out a loud, pointed comment. "Can you believe he's lying about the property lines? Karen said he's trying to steal that new house." Steal? That was when I realized Karen had already spread her poison through the neighborhood. She had turned me into the villain of a story I hadn't even known I was part of. Rick made sure to add fuel to the fire. Every time he saw me, he would smirk or laugh loudly at nothing, just to get under my skin. He started positioning himself in full view whenever I walked outside, leaning against his truck with folded arms, wearing that same smug expression as if I were a joke he enjoyed repeating. And when his wife noticed me passing by, she made sure to give me the same obscene gestures she had the day before, this time more exaggerated, more confident, more mocking. Their harassment clawed at me from every direction. My stomach tightened every time I stepped out of my house. I found myself second-guessing everything. My decisions, my memory, even my ownership. One evening, I stood in my living room staring at the framed deed on the wall, wondering if I had somehow misread it years ago. The doubt crept in slowly, sinking its teeth deeper the longer I let it sit. What if I had overlooked something? What if there was some clause that gave the HOA more control than I realized? That fear drove me to pull out every real estate document I owned. I sat on the floor surrounded by folders and old files, searching for anything that could confirm I wasn't losing my mind. And that's when I stumbled onto something that snapped me back into reality. I found an old note from my realtor explaining that property boundaries are established only by county records and certified surveys, not by HOA maps, pamphlets, or anything they publish themselves. A spark of clarity lit inside me. HOAs can regulate paint colors and mailbox styles, but they can't rewrite property lines. They have zero authority over land boundaries. None. That realization was the first piece of solid ground I had felt under my feet since returning home. But the HOA had no intention of letting me regain stability. Their gaslighting didn't slow down, it intensified. More neighbors began avoiding me. More whispers followed. Rick's wife threw another hand gesture at me one evening with the confidence of someone who believed the entire neighborhood had her back. But nothing prepared me for what I saw next. As I stepped onto my porch the following morning, a bright yellow notice was taped to my front door, fluttering in the wind. The message printed across it in large block letters stopped my heart cold. Effective immediately, you are required to vacate the disputed area. The moment the surveyor placed the first stake in the soil, I knew something big was coming. The metallic clang of the stake driver echoed through the clearing like a warning bell, and for the first time since returning home, I felt a hint of certainty cutting through the fog of doubt and harassment surrounding me. The morning air was cold, sharp enough to sting my lungs, and a steady wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine needles. I stood with my arms crossed, watching the team move with calm precision, their tape measures snapping open like whips against the silence. Bright-colored flags fluttered in the breeze, one after another popping into the soil, trailing across the ground in a straight, unforgiving line. Their bright colors contrasted with the dull winter earth, marking boundaries I knew were mine long before Rick Dalton ever showed up with his lumber and misplaced confidence. Every stake, every measurement tightened my chest a little more, not from fear, but from the slow, rising realization that the truth was finally taking shape right before my eyes. One surveyor walked the length of the clearing, stepping over fresh ridges left by construction trucks. Another adjusted a laser level, its red beam cutting through the air in a perfect line. I could hear the quiet murmurs between them, professional and low, but even without words I understood the tone. Something was very wrong with how that house sat on the land. When they finally called me over, I felt the world narrow down to the stretch of flagged dirt in front of us. The lead surveyor pointed at the markers, then at the house. "Your boundary line runs here," he said, dragging his finger along the path of flags. "But the structure..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The house wasn't just a few inches over the line. It wasn't even a foot or two off. The entire structure, every wall, every room, every square foot of Rick's brand new home, was deep inside my property, nearly 30 feet in. For a long moment I couldn't speak. A rush of frustration and relief slammed through me at the same time. Frustration at the stupidity and arrogance that had created this disaster. Relief because for the first time since the HOA and my neighbors began their campaign against me, I had something solid, undeniable concrete proof that I wasn't the one losing my mind. The surveyors handed me a preliminary diagram, and my hands shook slightly as I held it. All the doubt Karen had tried to plant in my head evaporated in an instant. There was no miscommunication, no misunderstanding, no shared line. Rick had built his dream home squarely on land he never owned. I didn't waste a second. The moment the surveyor stepped back, I pulled out my phone and called the real estate attorney whose number I had kept saved since the day I bought the property. I explained everything: Rick, the house, the HOA harassment, the bogus violations, the gaslighting. His voice hardened immediately. "Send me the survey report," he said. "This is a textbook case of encroachment." He also reminded me of something crucial, something most homeowners never learn until it's too late. New construction cannot claim adverse possession. It doesn't matter how long the builder stays, how much money they spent, or what the HOA says. If it was built illegally on someone else's land, the law is brutally clear. The structure either comes down or it belongs to the rightful property owner. Within an hour, he began preparing preliminary paperwork. Meanwhile, the HOA members pretended nothing was wrong, some of them even walking their dogs past me with artificial smiles, as if they hadn't been whispering about me the day before. But the surveyor wasn't done with me. As he packed up his equipment, he looked at me with a seriousness that tightened the air between us. "This is going to be a massive legal battle," he said quietly. "Get ready." That night, Karen banged on my door like she had a warrant. The pounding wasn't the kind that came from a neighbor wanting to talk or even argue. It was the kind that demanded obedience. The kind that said, "Open up, or I'll break this door down myself." When I pulled it open, she stood there with her clipboard clutched like a weapon, her jaw tight, her eyes burning with a mix of authority and fury. Behind her, porch lights flicked on across the street, curious eyes peeking from behind blinds. She wanted an audience. She wanted this moment to sting. "We're having an emergency HOA meeting," she announced, not asking, not inviting, ordering. "And your attendance is required." I stared at her, still replaying the surveyor's words from earlier that day. "Required by whom?" I asked quietly. "You don't own me, and you don't own my land." Her lips curled. "We'll see about that." 20 minutes later, I found myself standing in the cramped HOA clubhouse, a tiny room that suddenly felt like a courtroom stacked against me. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle, all occupied by board members who watched me with the same cold hostility I had felt since returning home. Karen took center stage, her voice sharp and loud, as if she wanted to ensure every word cut deep enough to leave scars. She began reading through the stack of fake violations the HOA had sent me that week. One by one, out loud, with exaggerated disgust: failure to comply with HOA authority, disrupting approved construction, trespassing, obstruction of community development. None of it real, none of it legal. But the room nodded along, drinking every word like it was gospel. Rick Dalton sat in the corner, arms crossed, playing the victim with a performance so dramatic it almost bordered on pathetic. When Karen paused, he took his cue. "I'm losing everything," he said loudly, making sure every board member heard him. "I trusted this community. I trusted the HOA. And now this guy is trying to destroy my life." His voice cracked at the end, a rehearsed tremble meant to paint me as the villain in a story I hadn't even agreed to be part of. I looked around the room hoping anyone would ask for proof, but instead the board erupted into murmurs of sympathy for Rick and disapproval toward me. One man shook his head in disgust. A woman whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "How could he do this to a family?" I opened my mouth to speak, but Karen shut me down instantly. "You'll speak when spoken to," she snapped. "Right now, the board is addressing your misconduct." It was absurd, infuriating, but also revealing. They were trying to corner me with noise, pressure, and public humiliation. It was gaslighting in a group format. A performance of power. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my attorney. "HOA is bluffing. They're in serious legal danger. Don't let them intimidate you." That text grounded me, gave me air again. And if anyone watching this has ever been bullied by an HOA, You know exactly how it feels when their fake confidence finally cracks. If you've dealt with HOA abuse before, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters more than their intimidation. Back in the room, Karen straightened her blazer and raised her voice, preparing her big finale. Given the severity of these violations, she declared, the HOA board has unanimously agreed to escalate this matter. I felt the room shift, the tension tightening like a noose. We will be filing a civil complaint, she continued, eyes locking onto mine with satisfaction. We are accusing you of interfering with community development. And just like that, the HOA officially declared war. Holding the original county plat map felt like holding the truth in my hands. The paper was old, slightly yellowed at the edges, but the lines drawn across it were bold, precise, and absolute. No gray areas, no interpretations, no HOA signatures or inflated egos trying to rewrite reality. Just the pure, undeniable record of what I owned. For the first time since this nightmare began, something solid pressed back against the weight of lies Karen and Rick had been piling on me. Getting this map had taken half my morning. The county recorder's office smelled faintly of toner and old files, the kind of place where truth sits buried in steel cabinets and fluorescent lights buzz like impatient witnesses. I explained my situation to the clerk, a soft-spoken older woman who adjusted her glasses with a sympathetic tilt of her head. When she pulled out the original plats and laid them across the counter, the room seemed to sharpen into focus. There it was, my land, my clearing, my boundaries, a perfect outline that matched exactly where the surveyors had placed their flags the day before. And the house Rick built, it sat well beyond his parcel, sitting deep inside mine like an invasive species. The clerk tapped the boundary line with her pen. This hasn't changed since the subdivision was originally filed, she said. County boundaries override anything an HOA claims. Always. I thanked her, carefully rolled up the map, and left the office with a sense of clarity humming under my skin. I called my attorney the moment I reached the parking lot. My voice steady, almost calm now. He asked me to send photos of the plat and the surveyor's diagrams. A few minutes later, he called me back. No hesitation in his tone. This is irrefutable, he said. We'll begin drafting the formal lawsuit today. There was a firmness in his voice I hadn't heard before. A confidence grounded in the kind of evidence that wins cases without theatrics. He reiterated something important, something every homeowner should know. Only county-approved surveys and plat maps are considered valid in court. HOA documents, neighborhood sketches, or anything created outside county authority mean nothing. They can't redraw property lines, no matter how loudly they claim otherwise. Hearing that felt like exhaling for the first time in weeks. When I finally drove back home, the neighborhood seemed different. Maybe it was just me. My posture a little straighter, my breath a little easier, my anger no longer tangled with doubt. As I pulled into my driveway, I caught sight of two HOA members across the cul-de-sac. They tried to mask their curiosity with forced smiles, but their eyes tracked every step I took, every document I carried. They knew something had shifted. Power had tilted, even if they didn't understand how. Rick was standing near the side of his illegally placed house, pretending to check something on his truck. He didn't look at me, not directly, but his jaw tightened when he saw the rolled map in my hand. He wiped his hands on his jeans, staring off into the distance with the expression of someone trying to stay calm while drowning. The confidence he'd flaunted earlier was gone. Now there was tension in his stance, a discomfort he couldn't hide. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the smallest spark of control returning. Not revenge, not triumph. Just the quiet, steady certainty that truth was finally on my side. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table reviewing documents, my phone rang. It was my attorney again. His tone was calm, but firm. "Prepare yourself," he warned. "They're going to deny everything." And with those words, I understood the real fight was just beginning. Rick showed up at my driveway at dawn, eyes red like he hadn't slept in days. The sky was still a pale gray, the kind that hovers between night and morning, and the air carried the damp chill of dew settling on the grass. I had just stepped outside to grab the plat map from my truck when I saw him standing there, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a man cornered. His shoulders slumped a little, and the aggressive arrogance he'd worn like a uniform was nowhere to be seen. "We need to talk," he muttered, voice rough. I crossed my arms, keeping distance. "About what?" He swallowed hard, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but maybe we can work something out. Just you and me. No lawyers, no HOA. A private deal. A private deal." The phrase alone told me exactly how desperate he had become. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I put everything into that house. Everything. My savings, my loan, my time. The contractor's already been paid. If the court sides with you, I lose it all. I can't let that happen." He paused, breathing hard. "Just sell me the land. Or part of it. Or lease it to me. I'm begging you." For a moment I felt a strange tug inside, an unexpected flicker of sympathy. He looked like a man drowning, reaching for anything, even the person he had insulted, mocked and threatened from the moment we met. Seeing the cracks in his bravado almost felt unreal. But then I remembered the lies, the harassment, the way he'd called me a scammer and cheered while Karen publicly humiliated me. I shook my head. "This isn't something we settle in your driveway. This is a legal matter, Rick. You built your house on my land. I didn't trick you. I didn't approve anything. And now we have to let the legal process handle it." His expression crumpled, anger and panic twisting together. "You don't understand. The bank is already breathing down my neck. Construction loans don't wait. If I lose this place, I lose more than a house." Before I could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. "Rick!" Karen Whitfield marched across the street, heels slamming against the pavement. Her expression was a blend of fury and disbelief, like she couldn't accept that Rick dared to speak to me without her supervision. "I told you not to engage with him," she snapped. "You're just making things worse." Rick flinched at her tone. "Karen, please, this isn't your—" She cut him off, spinning toward me with venom in her eyes. "You're manipulating him," she accused loudly, loud enough for passing neighbors to hear. "You're unstable. Everyone can see that. You're twisting the situation to make him vulnerable." The accusation was ridiculous, but her voice carried, drawing curtains and curious glances. My chest tightened with frustration. "He came to me," I said evenly. "I didn't ask for this conversation." Karen stepped closer, invading my space with the confidence of someone who thought rules did not apply to her. "You're trying to sabotage our community," she hissed, "and we're not going to let you." Rick looked between us, shame and fear etched across his face. The pressure from both sides was crushing him, and for a brief second, I could see just how desperate he'd become. But then his expression hardened. Something snapped inside him. He jabbed a finger toward me, voice trembling with fury. "Fine. If you won't help me privately, then you'll regret this in court." And with that threat hanging in the cold morning air, he turned away, leaving behind a tension so sharp it felt like the ground itself might split beneath us. That night, someone left a dead branch smashed against my window. The loud crack of wood hitting glass jolted me upright. Heart racing, breath caught somewhere between fear and fury. At first I thought it might have been the wind, but when I stepped outside with a flashlight, the branch lay directly beneath the window. Placed, not fallen. Fresh scrape marks streaked the siding where someone had dragged it. That was the moment I realized the harassment wasn't just beginning. It had already begun. Over the next few days, the HOA's campaign intensified with mechanical precision. Every morning, without fail, I found yet another violation letter stuffed under my door. Noise disturbance, improper parking, unapproved landscaping, even one accusing me of creating a hostile environment. All fabricated, all designed to overwhelm me with pressure and paperwork. By the fourth day, I stopped opening them and began saving them in a labeled box titled evidence. The false complaints didn't stop at letters. Neighbors, some coerced, others complicit, began calling the HOA to report noises from my home at times I wasn't even there. More than once, I returned from groceries or work to find an HOA member standing on my property, clipboard in hand, pretending to conduct an inspection. Karen had weaponized the board against me, and they moved like soldiers carrying out her orders. At night, Rick made sure peace was impossible. He parked his oversized truck sideways across the edge of my driveway, just enough to block entry unless I squeezed past at an angle. And when the sun went down, he'd start up loud construction, hammering, drilling, sawing, despite having no legal right to work on that house. The noise echoed through the clearing long after midnight, making sleep nearly impossible. Trash appeared on my porch twice. Not accidental litter, but small bags of household waste, banana peels, food scraps, wrappers, paper towels, placed carefully, deliberately. When I opened my door one morning to the sour smell of rotting garbage, something in me hardened. Fear mixed with anger, but I refused to be cornered. This was when my attorney reminded me of an important detail about my state: one-party consent recording laws. As long as I was part of any conversation, or the recorder was on my property, I could legally record interactions. That nugget of legal truth became my shield. I mounted cameras on the corners of my house, hidden but angled perfectly. I kept a voice recorder in my pocket whenever I stepped outside. Every encounter with Karen, every word from Rick, every suspicious movement, I captured it all. The pressure took a toll. My chest stayed tight. My nights were restless. My mornings were spent checking my surroundings before stepping out. The clearing felt smaller each day, the air heavier with the hostility of people who should have been neighbors. But my attorney's voice stayed in my mind. Patience. Document everything. Let them expose themselves. And then, one night, they finally did. Around 2 a.m., my security camera pinged. Half asleep, I opened the live feed. A shadow moved along the edge of my property. Slow, deliberate, too familiar to ignore. Someone I recognized. Someone who had no reason to be there. Karen strutted into the courtroom like she had already won. Chin high, blazer stiff, heels clicking sharply against the floor, she moved with the confidence of someone who believed the law bent for her convenience. Rick followed behind her, shoulders tense, eyes darting around the room like he expected to be ambushed. I stood with my attorney at the plaintiff's table, heart pounding, palms cold, but steady. Today was the day everything was finally laid bare. The judge entered, an older man with silver hair and a stern expression that demanded respect without a word. As soon as he sat, he asked for all documentation related to property boundaries. My attorney moved first, sliding the official county plat map forward along with the certified survey diagrams. Their neat, precise measurements filled the table with a clarity that felt almost physical. Karen, on the other hand, submitted a thin folder of HOA records, full of highlighted printouts and handwritten notes. The kind of paperwork a judge would dismiss before even opening. The judge studied our documents carefully, glasses low on his nose. "These surveys are recent and professionally certified?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor," my attorney replied. He nodded once, then he looked at Karen. "And you're telling the court your HOA documents override a county-filed plat map?" She straightened defensively. "Your Honor, our community has long-standing development policies. We approved construction based on our internal—" The judge held up a hand. "Stop. HOA guidelines do not supersede county land boundaries. Ever." A quiet murmur swept through the gallery behind us. Karen's face tightened. Rick sank a little lower into his chair. Then came the recordings. My attorney played clips of Karen insisting I was trespassing on my own land, Rick threatening legal action for a property he didn't own, neighbors repeating misinformation Karen had fed them. The judge's eyebrows inched higher with every playback. When the last recording ended, Karen shouting that she would handle me personally, the judge leaned back, jaw tense. "Ms. Whitfield," he said slowly, "not only did you overstep your authority, but you weaponized the HOA to harass a homeowner who was entirely within his rights. Karen tried to interrupt. Your Honor, if I could just… You've said enough. She froze. Then the judge turned to Rick. And you built a home, without proper verification, on land that does not belong to you. That is not a boundary dispute. That is a major encroachment. Rick swallowed hard. His voice cracked. It was an honest mistake. I thought, the law doesn't hinge on what you thought, the judge said. It hinges on evidence. Finally, the ruling came down like a hammer. Mr. Dalton must either demolish the constructed home at his own expense or transfer full ownership of the home, free of all liens, to the rightful landowner. Immediately, the room erupted in gasps. Karen went pale. Rick stared straight ahead, stunned. Relief washed over me. Not triumph, not gloating, just the weight of months of injustice finally lifting. As the courtroom emptied, Rick brushed past me, his voice low and trembling with bitterness. If I go down, he muttered, she goes down with me. And in that moment I knew the fallout wasn't over. It was just beginning. I watched movers carry Rick's furniture out while Karen screamed at him in the yard. It was a surreal, almost cinematic scene. One I never imagined I'd witness when I first stepped onto my land 8 months earlier. Cardboard boxes stacked in the driveway. Loose items tossed into the back of a U-Haul. Rick pacing, hands in his hair, shouting at the movers to be careful even though his voice cracked with exhaustion. And Karen, red-faced and shrill, berating him so loudly the entire street could hear every bitter word. The court's ruling hit Rick harder than I expected. After running numbers with his lender, contractors, and attorney, he realized demolishing the structure would financially ruin him. Transferring the home to me, free of liens, was his only option. He signed the paperwork with trembling hands, barely looking up, barely breathing, barely holding himself together. When the pen finally left the page, something inside him seemed to collapse. He wouldn't meet my eyes, but I could feel the weight of his resentment radiating off him. Karen, though, reacted differently. The HOA board, many of whom had cheered her on during the sham violations and gossip campaign, began distancing themselves the moment the judge reprimanded her. Suddenly, her leadership didn't seem so admirable. Board members avoided her in public. Side conversations died when she approached. The shift was subtle at first, but unmistakable. Within a week, I heard whispers that the board had called a private meeting, one she wasn't invited to. They were reviewing her decisions, her correspondence, her misuse of HOA authority. I didn't have access to their internal documents, but judging by the way several board members glared at her during morning walks, I knew an internal investigation was already underway. Karen tried to reclaim control by confronting me directly. She marched across my driveway one afternoon, face tight with rage, hands clenched. "You think you've won?" she spat. "You have no idea how this community works. I still have influence." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't even fully turn to face her. I simply said, "Karen, we're done talking. Any further communication goes through my attorney." The look on her face, shock, then fury, then something almost like fear, was more satisfying than any argument I could have won. She stormed off without another word, but her shoulders weren't squared with confidence anymore. They sagged, rounded, as if the weight she'd carried for years was finally crushing her instead of everyone around her. As news spread of the court ruling, the neighborhood's tone changed. The same people who had avoided me, whispered about me, judged me without knowing the truth, now watched Karen with suspicion. I overheard conversations at mailboxes, in driveways, on evening walks. She overstepped. She abused her power. She dragged the whole HOA into a lawsuit we could have avoided. For the first time in months, the tension around me began to dissolve. Relief didn't come in a wave, it crept in slowly, replacing anxiety with something steadier. Satisfaction. Not revenge, not triumph, just the quiet knowledge that truth had finally broken through the noise. Rick's downfall was loud and messy. Karen's was slow and suffocating. But both were inevitable. And then came the moment that sealed everything. As the movers finished loading the last of Rick's belongings, a white sedan pulled up in front of Karen's house. A county official stepped out holding a certified letter. Karen met him halfway down her walkway, confusion on her face, right up until she looked at the envelope. Her expression drained to absolute shock. She went pale. And in that instant, I knew whatever consequences were coming next were for her. For the first time in months, I slept without fear. No phantom knocks in the night. No headlights sweeping across my bedroom wall. No pounding heartbeat keeping me awake as I wondered what the HOA would try next. Just quiet. Deep, peaceful, uninterrupted quiet. It was the kind of silence I hadn't realized I'd been craving. The kind that signaled something had finally shifted. The storm was passing, and for the first time, the air felt clear. The county's certified notice sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Whatever was in that letter, it was enough to push Karen Whitfield out of power within days. The HOA board held a meeting without her, and by the end of the week, Karen was officially removed as president. No dramatic speech, no farewell. No applause. Just a simple announcement posted on the community bulletin board, effective immediately. Karen Whitfield is no longer serving on the HOA board. Neighbors whispered about misconduct, about overstepping authority, about misusing HOA resources. I didn't know the exact charges, but whatever they were, Karen had gone from ruling the community with a clenched fist to staying locked inside her house, blinds drawn, avoiding the very people she once intimidated. Her fall was quiet, almost silent, but complete. Rick's was even quieter. After signing over the house, he packed what little dignity he had left and moved away before dawn one morning. No goodbye. No confrontation. No last-minute threats. Just a moving truck rolling out of the cul-de-sac as neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering. For someone who once strutted around with arrogant pride, his final exit was nothing more than a muted retreat, a shadow slipping out of the story. With the conflict behind me, I finally turned my attention to the house. The house Rick built illegally but now belonged entirely to me. Despite the emotional weight tied to it, the structure itself was solid, well designed, nearly finished. I hired a crew to complete the remaining interior work and touched up the exterior where construction had paused. Walking through it after everything was done felt strange, like stepping through the pages of someone else's unfinished dream. But as time passed, the bitterness faded. It became just a house, a valuable asset. When I eventually listed it, the offers poured in. And when it sold, well above market value, I realized the ordeal had unintentionally delivered me one of the biggest financial wins of my life. That's when another reminder clicked into place. A legal nugget every homeowner should know. HOAs cannot override county deed rights. They can regulate mailbox colors and lawn heights, but they cannot rewrite land boundaries or challenge recorded plat maps. The truth lives in county offices, not HOA meeting rooms. If you've ever dealt with HOA overreach or harassment, share your story in the comments. These situations happen more often than people realize, and your voice might help someone who's going through something similar. Life slowly returned to normal. The tension that once clouded the cul-de-sac evaporated. Neighbors began greeting me again, cautiously at first, then genuinely. The clearing felt open and peaceful. My home felt safe again, but peace never lasts forever. Not in communities like this. One crisp afternoon, as I walked toward my mailbox with a renewed sense of confidence, I noticed a fresh envelope tucked inside. The HOA logo formed a sharp square in the upper corner. My stomach tightened. It wasn't Karen's handwriting, and it wasn't a friendly welcome letter. Just 6 words printed cleanly across the front. Notice of required compliance review. Just when I thought the nightmare was over, the new HOA board wanted a meeting. The request came in the form of a neatly typed letter delivered just days after I'd finally started breathing freely again. There was no intimidation in the wording, no threats, no manufactured urgency. But the moment I saw it, a familiar tension tightened in my chest. After everything I'd endured, The last thing I wanted was another round of HOA politics. But this time, the fear didn't control me. I had survived far worse than an unsolicited meeting request. The worst of the storm had already passed. As I sat at my kitchen table, the letter unfolded in front of me. I realized something important. The chaos, harassment, court battles, and endless lies had solidified something inside me. Something steady, unshakable. The ordeal had forced me to understand my rights better than I ever had, and it taught me the value of standing firm even when an entire community tries to crush you under fabricated authority. Looking back, I saw the entire journey not as a story of conflict, but as a lesson in patience, evidence, and refusing to let intimidation make you retreat from what is rightfully yours. The moral was simple but powerful. Protect your deeds, protect your property, and never let anyone, whether it's an arrogant neighbor or a power-hungry HOA president, convince you that they have more authority over your land than the law itself. County records don't bend. Facts don't shift just because someone screams louder. And truth, eventually, cuts through even the thickest fog of lies. I thought about Rick disappearing quietly after losing everything he'd gambled on. I thought about Karen, stripped of her position and hiding behind closed blinds, her reign of intimidation crumbling under its own weight. And then I thought about the house I'd fought for, the land I defended, and the justice that finally came full circle. For the first time since returning home months ago, I felt a real, grounded sense of peace, a peace I had earned the hard way. But peace in an HOA-controlled neighborhood is never permanent, is it? The new board's meeting request was vague, but I had a suspicion about what they wanted. New leadership often means new rules, new initiatives, new attempts to restore order after a scandal. And sometimes, when a previous president falls hard, the next board tries to reassert authority in subtler, quieter ways. A different kind of power play. Not loud like Karen's, not reckless like Rick's, but calculated. As I folded the letter and set it aside, I knew one thing. Whatever they wanted, I would handle it differently this time. Calmly, knowledgeably, with every legal tool already prepared. The story wasn't continuing because the nightmare hadn't ended. It was continuing because life in this neighborhood was never simple. And maybe, just maybe, the next chapter would reveal something even darker beneath the surface. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, a corrupt neighbor, or a situation that spiraled out of control just because someone thought they had more power than they really did, share your story in the comments. You never know who your experience might help. And stay tuned for the next chapter, because the new HOA board's first move was only the beginning.